Hello everyone, and welcome to my instructional video on open educational resources. My name is Katie Kelly, and I am a class representative from EME5250 Spring 2020. Today I will be outlining the basics of open educational resources, also known as OER, as well as highlighting some of the major portions of the OER repository project developed by the Spring 2020 section of this class. Our agenda for this particular video includes define the concept of open educational resources, identify an example of familiar open educational resources, and explore the core elements of open educational resources. This instructional video series comes in two parts, and this part will focus more on introducing you to the idea of OER. Before we dive right in, take a moment to pause the video. What do you know about open educational resources? If you are not familiar with this term, what does the term and the context of the different words you see here imply for you? Here's a working definition of open educational resources. OER are educational materials that are released at little to no cost and with fewer usage restrictions for the general public. Depending on the variety of public domain or Creative Commons licenses an OER uses, educators typically have greater freedom pertaining to saving, using, and changing that material. While you may not have heard the term open educational resource, there is an example of finding and sharing different types of resources that may be somewhat more familiar to you. And this is the advanced Google search with license restrictions. In order to do this, you would go to google.com, you would select the settings option in the lower corner of the screen and then advanced search. Once you are in the advanced search section of the Google search engine, you would select free to use, share, or modify, even commercially, or free to use, share, or modify, depending on what types of freedoms you would like from the usage rights bar. And finally, you would then type your keywords into the search bar in order to find materials that are restricted by particular license types. And those license types are typically the same types of licenses that we will see in open educational resources. Before we get too deep into the idea of OER, I would like to contrast it from another similar concept called open learning. Open learning shares sort of the same idea of openness and freedom of learning that OER encompasses. However, open learning is more focused on the idea that learning in general is more broadly accessible to everyone. And the details for how this is accomplished may vary, but usually this manifests in various courses, materials, things like that are offered online, sometimes through MOOCs. Sometimes these resources have longer timelines for completion or lower to non-existent costs associated with them. There are even several open universities around the world where students can earn degrees at much lower costs than traditional universities. Open educational resources, on the other hand, specifically refers to materials that have an open license that allow them to be more easily accessed and adapted and distributed. This all depends on the type of license that's used and thus the degree of openness that is associated with that content. However, many of these resources are posted in formats that you are able to edit as a user without having any sort of really expensive software. And these resources come in all different types of mediums. You'll find textbooks, videos, lesson plans, sometimes even entire courses. Regarding the degree of openness in OER, this tends to depend on the license that is attached to that particular open educational resource. To find a lot more detailed information about all of these license types, or to use these licenses for your own materials, you can access the creativecommons.org link at the top of the screen, and that will take you to a much more thorough educational resource on licensing. But for now, we're going to go through the types of Creative Commons licenses you will often see associated with OER. First, we have attribution, and this one is the most accommodating of all of the different Creative Commons licenses. This license lets you adapt, change, remix, and even share the work commercially or non-commercially as long as you give attribution to the original creator. Attribution share alike is a little bit more strict regarding how you can use it, but again, it allows you to adapt the work, share it, change it for commercial purposes if you'd like, as long as you credit the original author and you license that material with the exact same license that the original held. Attribution no derivs means that you must credit the original author and you are not allowed to share the adapted form of that particular material if you have made changes to it. Attribution non-commercial means that you are able to adapt and change and share your copy of that particular resource. However, you are not able to do so in a way that will make money. Attribution non-commercial share alike means that you can remix and tweak and adapt that particular work as long as it is for non-commercial purposes and you license that adapted version with the same license the original material held. And finally, we have the strictest of all of these different license types, which is attribution non-commercial no derivs, which means you must credit the original author, you cannot use the material for commercial purposes, and you cannot share the adapted version or any changes you've made to that material. Now, once we know what the different types of licenses are, which license is attached to the materials we're interested in, and therefore the usage rights associated with that license, we can start practicing the 5 R's. What are the 5 R's? These include retain, revise, remix, reuse, and redistribute. And these are all of the different types of tasks that you may be able to do with an open educational resource. Getting into the details of each of the 5 R's, first we have retain, and this is your ability to control and save your own copy of that particular open educational resource. So it might be available in a repository where you can create a free account and then save that resource, or it may be something like a Word document or PDF or PowerPoint where you can simply download and save it. Revise means that you can adapt and modify that particular resource, doing things like translating it into another language or, perhaps changing a few words around, things like that. And this is typically most doable when that particular resource is posted in a format that you can edit without any expensive software. Remix means that you can combine either the original version of that material or your revised copy of the resource with other different types of materials. So, for example, let's say you have some really good readings mixed with a lesson plan and you find an openly licensed video you'd like to include. Well, you've now remixed that video by combining it with a couple of other educational materials and thereby creating a mashup. Reuse refers to your right to share the original or revised or remixed version of that open educational resource publicly. So you might do that on a website, for work, in a class, etc. And finally, redistribute refers to your ability to share copies of the original or revised or remixed copy of that open educational resource. You might post it online, share it through social media, email it to your colleagues, things like that. At this point, you might be wondering, how do you find OER and what are the types of OER that are available online, particularly as we are all practicing social distancing and can't easily access resources like libraries? Well, a few things you might consult include OER repositories, which are large databases with all different types of open educational resources. These vary by topic, by learner age level, by medium type. Sometimes they're even differentiated by the standards that they meet. So, for example, you may have a material that has been specifically aligned with Common Core standards, and that is a filter you can choose. One really good website for this is oercommons.org, and this will take you to a really fantastic broad variety of OER that you can search and filter to your heart's desire. Additionally, there are online resources specifically devoted to entire open courses and books. So if you're interested in finding some sort of openly licensed textbook, or perhaps engaging in some professional development while we're all stuck at home, you can find open courses and open books that are posted on websites that are specifically devoted to that purpose. When you're using any open educational resource, particularly if you're using it to teach or otherwise educate others, remember to incorporate your quality assessment skills when choosing your open educational resource. Now, I think there is a tendency to think that if something's free, it's probably not of good quality, and that is certainly not always the case with OER. But it is good to practice some critical thinking and check things like spelling, grammar, accuracy of the content. Things like that will just help you to make sure that you're getting the type of quality you'd like in your OER. Most of the information in this video was adapted from the overall project created by the EME5250 course, which you can access via the link on the screen, which is also available in the video description. And there are a few other sources of information, such as the license type information and 5R information, that were adapted from other open educational resources, and you can find the attribution information for those on the screen. Thank you so much for watching part 1 of our OER series. In part 2, I will get into the specifics of the OER repository developed by the spring section of EME 5250. Tune in for that, and thanks so much for watching.